about a plot?
Well, there's room in my family's plot. They're waiting for me. Why are you so hostile to the Harper government?
They lied.
I'm not qualified to say, but I wouldn't dispute it.
That's unusual. You usually dispute everything.
Canada is a liberal society and justly proud of it. It has an opportunity to lead the world out of the grip of the prison industry and psychology that has been a constant source of abuse for millennia.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, The Zoomer with Conrad Black and Denise Dunlop.
We've got a fantastic lineup tonight. Conrad has a conversation with Margaret Atwood that should surprise you, and some very wise folks around the table to talk about our rituals of departure, also known as funerals. Here are some stories that we're following this week. Traffic jams could soon be a thing of the past. The Martin Aircraft Company in New Zealand is a year away from launching a commercial jetpack. This so-called motorcycle of the sky is being classified as a micro-light aircraft, which means you'll need a pilot's license to operate it and deep pockets. It'll retail for about $150,000. It seems that Michelle Obama is the driving force behind a new plastic surgery trend. The First Lady's exceptionally toned arms have inspired an increase in upper arm lifts, with more than 15,000 procedures done last year alone. Apparently, you can have the fat sucked out of the back of your arm, and then that excess skin is kind of tucked into your armpits. Or you could do this. Cornell University's Dr. Carl Pillemer studied 1,000 Uber Zoomers over the age of 80 and found what we regret most in life is worrying. And what are we worrying about? Well, according to a recent CARP poll, Canadians over 80 are most worried about outliving their money. The Uber Zoomers are sending us a message. Don't worry so much. You may not live to regret it. And 75 years ago on October 30th, Orson Welles broadcast a radio adaptation of the sci-fi play The War of the Worlds.
Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city.
Legend has it that many who missed the intro to the program thought it was real.
When the radio came, and I suppose now television, anything that came through that new machine was believed. So in a way, our broadcast was an assault on the credibility of that machine. We wanted people to understand that they shouldn't take any opinion predigested, and they shouldn't swallow everything that came through the tap.
A recent UK study titled Work Longer, Live Healthier found that the longer people are retired, the worse their mental and physical health got. The study by the Institute of Economic Affairs points to a 40% increased risk of depression and a 60% increased risk of a physical ailment during retirement.
This is a simple thing. People who detach completely lose the motivation to get up, to get dressed, to stay engaged. Just the fact of going out to work makes you mobile. And really, at the core, what they're saying is when you stop moving around, you begin that decline. In the case of CARP, which used to be known as the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, we advocate against retirement in that sense. It's not right to force people to work when they don't want to, in the same way that it's not right to force people not to work when they want to or they need to. But even people who don't want to keep doing what they used to do understand that they need to engage. But a basic message is, if you stop, you die.
I don't plan to retire, and I agree with Moses that it's great to get up. You have a purpose, you keep the mind active, and you keep busy, and it makes a difference in your lifestyle altogether.
We as a society, before the time of any of us here, buy into the theory that since people enjoyed holidays, enjoyed their weekends, that the thing that was really the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow was that they would accumulate savings sufficient to see them through a retirement period when they really didn't have to work, and it would be fun and it would really be good for them. For example, Social Security was adopted in 1935 by President Roosevelt when people had an actuarial age expectancy that was only 3 or 4 years longer than their expected retirement age. And in the first place, it was a false premise because, as you both said, it is a bore to just stop and do nothing, and it does kill you. And in the second place, people live a lot longer, and the pension arrangements are all going bankrupt everywhere as a result of it.
People now have a retirement ahead of them that may be longer than the period of time in which they've worked.
There's a lot of conversation going on in Canada, and particularly in Quebec, about the PQ Charter of Values. So I'm going to start with you, Conrad, because I know that you talked to Bob Ray recently, and when you asked him a question about the Charter of Values, he said it was wrong-headed.
I thought he understated it. I think it's outrageous and insane. I don't think the National Assembly of the great Quebec nation, or any legislative body in this country, has any standing at all to tell people what their values are. I think the whole concept is offensive. I accept that there is a public security argument that people have to be identifiable, and that was the French issue, the French legislation, that you have to be able to tell who people are. But this idea of the government deciding how conspicuous a religious symbol that they wear will be is just profoundly offensive. It's a spiteful act by atheistic authoritarians. But apart from all of that, they're perfectly entitled to their opinions, but they have no right to tell the people of Quebec or anyone else what their values are, or tell people how they can dress, I think.
And they used to say about Montreal that you can't throw a stone without breaking a church window. So to remove that presence, not to mention that huge looming cross at the top of the hill, seems to me a futile endeavor. Half the streets in Montreal are named after saints, aren't they? So I don't know how they might stop. And what is the problem with a little beanie that may or may not have a Star of David on it? I think Jonathan Kay in the Post got it right. Their real concern is the burqa. It is the mask face, and frankly, I agree with that. But in order not to seem to be prejudicing just that one extreme part of a religion, they've had to kind of sweep everything into it. I can hardly wait for the equivalent of the language police to go around measuring crucifixes and little stars of David.
We do have dress codes. We do have standards to have our staff looking professional and such, but it doesn't go to the extent where it limits them from displaying religious symbols. And in an organization or a company that should embrace tolerance and acceptance, I find it odd that government, who should be leading it as an example, would go opposite to that.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned government too, because a lot of people have talked about whether or not this is a maneuver to acquire votes.
This job of a legislation to speak by and for its people is missing in this equation, and that's why it feels like a strictly cynical political wedge issue. And these. We're not talking about symbols either, is the other thing I think it's important to point out. That the Quebec roots give, I think, the PQ the idea that you can be a Catholic without wearing a crucifix, but you can't be a Sikh without wearing a turban.
In some ways, it's an straight anti-Muslim move, but in other ways it is, as I said at the outset, an atheistic move. So there are a good many Quebecers who are irreligious people who might be susceptible to that, and there would certainly be a good many who have reservations about the Muslims, and I think Tom's right that it's a wedge move, and they think the votes are there, but it is a very high stakes gamble. And since all of us have expressed reservations about it, and I accept we're none of us the average Quebec voter, but we're not completely unrepresentative of reasonable, fair-minded people, which is the majority of people in Quebec. I would say that it wouldn't work if that's what they try, but that may be what they're trying to do.
Yeah, what do you think, Evan?
Well, you know what? I was in Quebec City last week, as a matter of fact, Denise, and I was wearing a Maple Leaf sweater and chased for blocks, scrutinized unfairly, and ran out of town.
Profiled,
if you will. Yes.
Racially profiled.
One Toronto Maple Leaf sweater chased.
We're going to be back after this. Stay tuned.
Regular physical activity is one of the, if not the most important thing that Zoomers can do to maintain both their physical and their mental health. There have been excellent studies that show that people who exercise regularly live longer, and actually it delays the onset of things like dementia. Before starting an exercise regime, especially a strenuous exercise regime, it's important to speak to your doctor. It's especially important to speak to your doctor if you suffer from things like chest pains, shortness of breath, dizziness, and arthritis. With any new exercise regime, you want to start slowly and progress slowly. You don't want to progress too quickly and have the risk of injuring yourself. Many gyms have exercise programs that are specifically designed for people who have suffered from heart attacks and strokes. These can be an integral part of your rehabilitation if you've suffered from one of these events. The benefits of physical activity are virtually endless. They include things like improving your energy level, improving your mental sharpness, and having a better sex life. I'm Dr. Zach for The Zoomer.
And breathe deeply. Let your breath do your work.
You might want to loosen your tie.
And breathe third eye.
Funerals have been with us, well, since we've been with us. And like everything else in life, Zoomers are intent on transforming the way we deal with death. Funerals are a $1.6 billion enterprise. It's a big box business, and it's in a grave state. We're living longer, and it's killing the funeral business. That is until 2020, when the demographic death rate is expected to rise again. The question is, how will we shape the rituals around dispatching to suit our needs and the loved ones we're leaving behind? In North America, cremations are up. Embalming is down. There's less burial and more memorial. Good thing, because this is where the plot thickens. There's less real estate to go around.
It's remarkable. I worked at a funeral home in Winnipeg with a third-generation undertaker who, when he had done his apprenticeship in the early 60s, the cremation rate was 2%. Cremation now in Canada is at 56%. Certainly that in Manitoba. It's even higher on the West Coast. It's up over 90% on Vancouver Island. There are places in the country where it's much lower, like PEI is still in the 20s. So it's cultural as well as real estate driven. But the impact of cremation on the industry is the equivalent of their French Revolution.
Adding to what Tom was just saying about the rise in the cremations, we're looking at why. What are the reasons people are choosing cremation over burial? And one of the reasons could be that Zoomers or Boomers are looking at the cost of funerals and perceiving cremation to be more cost-effective.
More environmental?
Secondly, yes, more environmental. They leave less of a footprint. And the third reason is that they may have been disenchanted with the original funeral experiences that they had when they were doing funerals for their fathers or grandparents, and not wanting to repeat that experience for themselves.
That's a lot of pressure for people to figure that out. When you're used to following fairly rigorous rules about what happened, and suddenly you're dealing with everything, this is big pressure. This is probably where your business is moving, right, to help people with that?
We've certainly changed in terms of preparing the body, telling families where to go, what to do, how to get to the grave. It's changed from that to being the families telling us, this is what we want, and how are you going to facilitate it for me? Right. And then the residual effect of that is the services. And how are they choosing to celebrate those services given that they're not having the body present anymore? They don't want the expensive casket, and making the services simpler and more celebratory, more fun.
And I knew a United Church minister in Winnipeg. The family asked him at the end, would you please say, God, put a pot of coffee on because Mother is on the way. and then blow out a candle. And he had to say, you know, I don't think it's me that you want here. I think what you're looking for is an event planner. And what you're interested in is something along the lines of a theatrical event. There remains the tyranny of choice, which is, if the field is wide open, what am I going to do that has meaning? I mean, we're not buying a car here.
I remember the day that my parents sat me down for the talk. And they pushed the certificate across the table, very proud to show that they had bought their plots and arranged for the upkeep of these plots so that we would not be troubled in our moment of greatest grief. They were proud of the fact. They had thought it through. It was something you just did.
You said you didn't pre-plan your funeral, right?
I'm still trying to figure out where babies come from.
You've got your daughter and your wife here. What do you think? Should he get on it? No. No. No, they don't want to be thinking about it. We're not thinking about it.
Not thinking about it.
Stay with us. We'll be back in a jiffy.
At my celebration of life, well, I would expect that they would get a sense of who I was, what I do, what my passions are.
I just want to be sure that there'll be no financial burden, and there won't be. I've got the spot picked out, paid for, and I've got insurance to pay for the actual funeral itself.
Well, I have a theme in mind with an Elvis tribute performer, so I've given it a bit of thought. There'll be alcohol involved as well.
I've actually just got to the point in my life where I'm dealing with my wills and estates and power of attorney and enduring power of attorney. So I've got that part almost covered.
When I die, it's no longer my problem. You know, it's always the living that suffer, not the dead.
That if somebody comes to visit my grave, as they approach, the screen comes to life. And on the screen is me, and I say hi.
Start with a casket. A simple wooden casket is about $600, while solid pine, oak, or mahogany caskets are all considerably more expensive. If you don't need a casket, a basic wooden urn starts at $150. Double that if you want stone, brass, or ceramic. Then there's the cost of the funeral service itself. A quick graveside service is in the $1,500 range. A full memorial service in a funeral home is more like $5,000. These types of funerals can include your embalming, transportation, funeral director, and other staff. However, if you want to have a church service, that's going to cost extra. And then there's the reception. Sandwiches? Do it yourself. Bargain. For a fully catered affair, the sky's the limit. Decorations, drinks, flowers, these prices can all add up quickly. And finally, there's the cost of a final resting place. A traditional plot with a headstone can run anywhere from $1,500 to $15,000, depending on the city and the cemetery. There are alternatives. If you're cremated, a buried urn with a simple marker is considerably less. Or you can scatter your ashes somewhere special. Bottom line, budget carefully.
Have you bought a plot?
Well, there's room in my family's plot. They're waiting for me.
Well, we don't have real estate in an established local cemetery here. But the point is, people, generally speaking, I deduced, had not thought about it at all. And now I've thought about it. I still haven't done anything about it.
Yes, you have.
I have had
I've seen a
investigations
picture.
and talks.
You're thinking pretty seriously about this. What have you got planned?
Well, I began to consider what a memorial for myself might look like, and of course, part of it began as a gag, but but when you get to a cemetery, what do you see? You see a marker, you see a name, you see two dates. It tells you nothing about the individual. But I thought, we're in a modern era, and I've made my life in television largely. So the first thought I had is I would have my marker in the shape of a Philco Predicta set. I think these are some of the most beautiful televisions ever made. They're the logo symbol for this show, and I thought, why don't I do that? And maybe I put a little sensor on it so that if somebody comes to visit my grave, as they approach, the screen comes to life. It could be a practical screen, not just a carved piece of granite. And on the screen is me, and I say hi. How are you? Nice of you to come by. How much time have you got? And then a little menu comes up, and it's got a kind of 30-second version of my career, a 2-minute version of my career. If you'd like the entire 2.5-hour story, that's available too. Or if you'd like to dispense with that and just see some family photographs, all you got to do is tap the screen. It's a
great idea.
Much more meaningful, contemporary, modern.
It doesn't sound at all like this big version I've seen of
then
of
I
your
got
funeral.
carried away a little
This
bit.
is kind of, it's
Can we
bigger.
take a
It's kind
shot
of
that?
Egyptian, actually, when you look at it. Yeah.
So I approached the Mount Pleasant Cemetery and wondered how amenable they might be to some of these more modern approaches. A small thing like that at the Mount Pleasant Cemetery would probably come to about $100 million.
What do you think, Linda? Price this for us, would you? We'll talk.
Is there any wiggle room?
But you know what? It's not so far-fetched, because we really do want this kind of control over the way over our legacy, for sure, and the way we're remembered. And you know, I think it's rather modest and calm in comparison to some of the ideas that we've heard about funerals. Take a look at this. Yep, that's exactly what happened with the ashes of the famous American gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson, all paid for by his pal Johnny Depp. Filmmaker Connie Deletti found all kinds of unconventional methods while making her documentary, Corpus.
Some of the things I found that you could do with your body after you die include mummification, plastination, cryonics, which includes freezing your body, turning your body into diamonds, or turning your cremated remains into glass. You can be shot into outer space and even become part of a concrete reef ball that is essentially meant to help underwater life.
I'd much rather be in the ocean with all that life and action going on around me than in a field with a bunch of old dead people.
Or you might consider promession, invented by Swedish marine biologist Suzanne Vigmasic.
Then you can finally understand what we talk about normally as the cycle of life.
The body is freeze-dried using liquid nitrogen, vibrated into crystalline dust, placed in a small biodegradable coffin, and buried shallowly to help a plant grow. And finally, or should I say, and vinily, that's the name of a firm that will press your ashes into a vinyl recording that includes your message and your favorite soundtrack.
As in death, as I never could in life, in life, in life, in life.
We're going to be back with more right after this message. So, Conrad, I have a question for you. As we in North America shift to more celebrations of life and less religious traditions, do you think there's a cost to losing our religion, if you would?
Well, I don't think I'd put it that way, but it depends, doesn't it, on what the deceased believed in and what the people who, presumably the next of kin who organized the funeral, believe in. I mean, where there's an element of commending the deceased to the mercy of a higher power, then it's certainly appropriate to do something religious and have a ceremony based on that act. I would say that this move from religion to spirituality is a distinction without a difference, though. I mean, if it's a spirituality question, you may not be an adherent or a communicant to a church, but you are still presumably interested in saying to the great hereafter, this person, this spirit now joining you is a very good spirit, and please take care of him.
And off you go then, yeah. Evan, like me, I bet you're going to a lot more funerals, sadly, than baby showers these days, yeah. Does less tradition mean less spirituality? Is that what you're saying?
What I think is that less tradition is bringing more spirituality into things. The ceremony may have a mixture of Buddhism and Christianity and Islamic traditions, but what I've been seeing is that the deceased wants this, and the family's going, well, no, we're not going to do that because that's not traditional, and we don't think that we should have that going on, and it's such a horrible thing. We're going to do it our way.
Really?
And
they're going against the wishes,
of the loved one.
When they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, and I think that's that's unfortunate, and little do they know that they'll get you later, but they're waiting for you.
One of the things we shouldn't neglect is the reason that the forms of disposing of the remains is changing is that the makeup of the country is changing, and there are communities that are not in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which believes in burial, insists on burial, Jews and Muslims certainly. And so we now have communities that believe in fire.
Buddhists and Hindus cremate the body usually within a day of the death. Hindus then disperse the ashes in a sacred body of water. Muslims opt for burying the body as soon as possible, and the grave should face Mecca. In the Jewish faith, open caskets are a no-no, and someone sits with the body 24/7 until the funeral. In the Philippines, some coffins are hung off a cliff to keep the deceased closer to heaven. In Bali, Indonesia, mourners zigzag to the funeral to confuse any bad spirits following the body. At an Irish wake, whiskey or beer will fuel a celebratory evening of increasingly hazy memories. And let's not forget the traditional New Orleans funeral, where music and celebration rule.
See, when I look at that, I'm very glad that I am Irish. That's all I'm saying in the back of it. Linda, how is the funeral business dealing with all these, the differences that are happening in the way we treat our deaths?
Well, from both the funeral and the cemetery industry, I think they've been trying to respond to the increase in these different cultures that are coming and demanding, not demanding, but seeking those types of rituals which are meaningful for them. And so we try to accommodate as best we can. Our cemetery company in particular have surveyed plots facing Mecca, have built features for the burning of incense and for offerings which Buddhists may partake in. So there are certainly influences from cultural groups that are making our cemeteries look at how they plan their facilities to accommodate these groups.
Thank you very much, and thank everybody around the table for your thoughts. We're going to be back after this. Thanks.
Why are you so hostile to the Harper government?
They lied.
I'm not qualified to say, but I wouldn't dispute it.
That's unusual. You usually dispute everything.
No, not everything you say.
Conrad sat down with author, inventor, activist Margaret Atwood recently. They did an interview just before her latest book came out, the third volume of her apocalyptic Mad Adam trilogy. And so you didn't talk about the book in the interview. So I'm going to plug it a little now because I've read it. It's amazing. Another amazing book. Have a look at this.
Peggy, thank you so much for joining us. If I may, I'd like to ask you about some other things than your writing. You have been, in conventional terms, something of a nationalist.
I certainly have been, but we were what is called cultural nationalists. Yes. That is, our nationalism had nothing to do with the, let us say, the European kinds that we saw in the, for instance, 30s. So our cultural nationalism consisted in the 60s of a very simple two-word statement: we exist.
And you were a great illustration of that. But how would you, if I may ask, would you square that with your sympathy for the Bloc Québécois, for example?
Well, that was, again, a pretty simple statement, in which I said that if I were in a riding in Quebec that had a choice between voting for one of Mr. Harper's Conservatives or the Bloc Québécois, I would vote for the Bloc.
But you didn't necessarily say you'd vote for the Bloc over the Liberals or the NDP.
No.
No, You see, that was somewhat misrepresented.
Yes,
Indeed, I was misled.
As we know.
And of course, it comes as a great revelation to me that the media ever gets anything wrong.
I got into cultural nationalism because I was interested in writing. And then I found that there were very few places in our own country where we could publish.
Yes.
So the infrastructure wasn't there. So the next challenge was to help build out the infrastructure.
And going back to that subject, do you not feel we've made some progress in Canada?
Oh, a huge amount.
Yes.
Just as an example, in 1960, there were 5 books published in English Canada by Canadian publishers in the entire year. 5. I shouldn't say books, I should say novels.
I am astonished to hear that.
Yeah, novels.
Really?
Poetry, it was more because young poets were churning it out in their cellars.
Yeah, and nonfiction books fared a bit better.
Nonfiction more. So
Yeah.
the hockey book has been with us
Yes,
for a
biographies
long
of Rocket
time.
Richard. Yeah.
Yeah, and books called things like Beautiful Canada. But again, you would go into a bookstore, and the Canadian novels wouldn't be in the place that said novels. They would be in the place that said Canadiana, along with the Cooking with Maple Syrup books.
Yeah.
So that's what we wanted to change. We wanted to be perceived as real writers who belonged on the novel shelf, not on the Cooking with Maple Syrup shelf.
Disclosure requires me to say that we are, in fact, co-venture owners of a cow.
We are.
Have you laid eyes on our cow?
I've laid eyes on a picture of it.
I see.
It looks like a cow.
Well,
we wouldn't be
it
able
looks
to
like
pick
one.
it out of the herd. It is a cow.
We
A very good cow.
Yep, and in good health and likely to go on
It seems to
producing
be
for a while.
in good health. It is one of the crack cows. No, let me rephrase that. It is one of the tippity-top cows from the Kingston prison farm that got auctioned off when that farm was closed, probably as part of a land
For the benefit
grab.
of viewers, we were opposed, both of us, to the closing of that farm, and are somewhat scandalized at prison conditions in this country generally.
We are scandalized.
And indeed, I, for notorious reasons, am particularly outraged at the whole concept of imprisonment for nonviolent people. But you are in fact a legal and criminal justice reform advocate.
Who could not be?
Well, unfortunately, many people aren't. But
Well, they want
including
more of
some
the same, yeah.
ministerially in charge of the field.
Yes, well, it gives them more to administer, doesn't it?
Could you tell me, do you feel that we're taking a step backwards with the direction the government's taking now?
All right, if you build big prisons, if you use taxpayer money to build big prisons beyond your capacity at the moment to fill them, what is it that you're going to need?
Mm-hmm.
You're actually going to need more criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is in Louisiana, where they have a for-profit prison system,
Yes.
which has to be full all the time in order to make a profit.
I wouldn't buy the line that the Louisiana prison system is in fact profitable, but they do try and raise revenue.
Yes,
and
they're attempting
parts of the American system are privatized, as you know, and there the pressures are terrible to make it as overcrowded and understaffed and inhuman as possible,
Because
and
they
as
have to
profitable
make a
as possible.
profit.
Yeah.
Yeah, in order to fill that, then you have to create more criminals. So they're not at all averse to the fact that what you graduate with from prison is a degree in being a criminal.
Why are you so hostile to the Harper government?
I don't think I would be hostile to the Harper government if it would behave properly. In other words, I'm not hostile to it on principle. And always one is quite willing to give any government the benefit of the doubt, see how they do.
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, I didn't appreciate being lied to about those planes.
The F-35s?
Those planes, yes.
Yeah, the fighter planes.
Yes, them.
What do you mean? There was a slight budget problem there.
A huge budget problem.
Yes.
And that huge budget problem was known before the election. And they I have to use the lie word, they lied.
At best, they finessed it seems. Yeah.
They lied. Be frank. They told a huge, whopping untruth.
I'm not qualified to say, but I wouldn't dispute it, but I just don't know.
Yes. That's unusual. You usually dispute everything.
No, not everything you say, Peggy. It looked to me like it was either gross inefficiency or they did mislead the country.
They lied.
But I don't know which it would be.
Okay, so let's just pretend that if they didn't know, they should have known. That would be the gross inefficiency. And since everybody was
They
writing
may have been
about
gullible buyers, no, that's possible.
Please, if you get elected, because it's assumed that at least you know how to run a budget.
And in fairness, in most
and then
respects,
it turns out
they
that
have.
you don't. And
Well,
then
in
it turns
most
out that you
respects, the
don't.
fiscal management of this government hasn't been bad.
It hasn't been good either, because you haven't got the bill for those planes yet.
Well, they aren't. We aren't really. We haven't actually bought them yet, have we?
Watch it.
Yeah.
Just watch that happen.
I'm prepared to fear the worst, I'm afraid. I am someone who has not yet got over the cancellation of the Avro Arrow. I thought we should have built our own planes.
Well, that was Mr. Diefenbaker, for whom I voted, by the way. And everybody, of course, has gone over the Avro Arrow time and again.
Yes.
And it seems to have been a personal grudge.
You can never rule that out with Mr. Diefenbaker.
Yes.
Though, in fairness, you can also make a good economic argument. But the point is, a serious country has to have an aerospace industry. And this was a great opportunity for us, even though it was a subsidiary of a British company.
Yes, but it was ahead of the game.
Yeah.
And
so was the commercial airliner they built, the jet airliner. But, and incidentally, now that this is such a current thing, defense spending is the best economic stimulus of all. And it does attract the highest income people and does produce the greatest generally diffused benefits in the economy.
Well, it's called defense spending, but what it really is,
well, it
it's a way of getting
ramifies
money
quite
out of
widely.
the taxpayer's pocket and then burning it up.
Yeah, well, but it can help science and technology.
Oh, yeah.
It can assist national security.
Yeah, we got the zipper.
And then, of course, you can end up, as the Americans do, having unemployment reduction programs in every community where you have a military facility.
Or a prison.
Yeah.
Yes, those are also being used as job creation.
The prison system in the U.S. keeps about 3.5 million people out of the unemployment figures. Now, unfortunately, we only have a sixth as many incarcerated people per capita, so the figures would be smaller here.
Well, I'm sure people are working on that.
So it seems. Peggy, I'm afraid that we are out of time, but it's been lovely to see you again, and thank you so much for joining us.
Lovely to see you.
That was lovely.
But she is lovely.
I know. Well, you have to have your together to talk to Margaret, though, right? Because she will challenge you on everything, which we love.
Conrad, do you own the front part of the cow or the back part of the cow?
I was afraid you'd ask me that. I'm the front of the cow.
The front of the cow? I'm going to ask Margaret, and I'll report back to you later.
Well, she gets the milk, yes.
She gets the milk. Yeah. Well, that's so.
She is the revenue-producing part.
So you're utterly confused. I'm sorry.
Exactly. We're going to be back after this.
Canada is a liberal society and justly proud of it, and has an opportunity to lead the world out of the grip of the prison industry and psychology that has been a constant source of abuse for millennia. Unfortunately for me, as a supporter of the Harper government, its entire approach to crime is mistaken. Almost all categories of crime have been in decline for 30 years, yet there's still official talk of a crime wave. The population is aging, which automatically brings a reduction, as older people generally lack the insouciance, as well as the perversity and the energy that the deliberate commission of most crimes requires. Increased use of security cameras and more sophisticated police work deter much more crime than in the past. The entire program to build prisons and engage 80,000 more correctional officers is a colossal waste of money in pursuit of votes the Conservative government already has in its pocket anyway. The imprisonment of nonviolent people is just an heirloom of a barbarous age. It does no good for the convicted. The public is not spared any risk. It is hideously expensive and is designed to destroy whatever connections the convicted people may still have to stabilizing factors in their lives, such as family. Canada is a liberal society and justly proud of it, and has an opportunity to lead the world out of the grip of the prison industry and psychology that has been a constant source of abuse for millennia. Let's do it.
The Zoomer is a two-way conversation. So find us on thezoomertv.com and Vision TV's Facebook. Tweet us at thezoomertv. And to join our audience, email us at audience@zoomermedia.ca.